Hi, and welcome. I'm Tiffaney Fox Quintana, Vice President of Marketing at Stampli, and welcome to the Leaders of Modern Finance. Today with us is Christina Liu, SVP and Chief Accounting Officer from Confluent. Christina, welcome.
Thank you, Tiffany. Very nice to be here.
Great. Well, we have a lot to learn about you today, but maybe quickly just give us a quick overview on your background, and then we'll go down your journey of becoming a chief accounting officer.
Of course, looking forward to an exciting conversation. So, a little bit background about myself. I am a working mom. I have two boys, age 13 and 8.5. I am an immigrant, born and raised in China, and came to the US as an adult. I am also the Chief Accounting Officer at Confluent.
Yes. I also have a 13-year-old too. We have a lot more in common than we realized at first.
That's right.
As we were getting ready, we were waving at each other from where we are. One of the interesting things I found about your profile was that you started off in biochemistry and then moved into accounting at one of the big four. I'm curious, what made you take that leap?
Well, that's a very good question, and I got that question a lot. If someone looks at my LinkedIn profile, you can tell that I graduated with my undergraduate degree in chemistry, and that was from a university back in China. And at that age of 21, 22, my parents told me you should go to the States to pursue further education. So here I came with two suitcases and enrolled in a PhD program of biochemistry. 6 months into the program, I realized, I was probably not cut out for the science field, although I really enjoyed, proving out hypotheses and the theoretical side of things. I still needed to be able to see the application of what I do in the real world. Mm-hmm. And so that realization made me look at opportunities outside of the science field. And of course, at that time, my parents told me, hey, why don't you look into business school? Maybe stay away from, the fluffy side of things.
And you mean like marketing?
No offense, Tiffany, didn't want to bring that up, but since you said that, yes. So you have to keep in mind, my parents are the very typical Asian stereotype parents, especially my mom being a tiger mom. So she said, why don't you go study accounting? At least you get a job. So that's how I got started. A very humble beginning as the immigrant foreign student.
Yeah.
Needing that security of having a job in a different country. So that's how I got started in accounting.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you find a lot of similarities between going into accounting and what it was you loved about science in general?
I think, like I said, the hypothesis development of hypothesis and proving out something works, something doesn't work, I think has really helped me a lot in my career as in the accounting field. Mm-hmm. Of course, there's the basic debits and credits, but as I continue to develop my career, more and more time I find myself trying to make decisions with incomplete information, whether that's significant transactions or a new area the company is growing into. There's a lack of 100% certainty of information. So how do you make decisions with incomplete data and maybe have different options and have different hypotheses, but along the way try to use data to either prove or disprove your hypothesis? I think that perhaps was the training earlier in my career in the science field has really helped me to be okay to live with incomplete data.
Yeah, and knowing where to go and looking and researching and finding where those answers really are and searching for it. It's when I actually started at Stampli, one of the ways our CEO described what accounts payable did is he's like, they're like investigators. They're trying to figure out, did this actually happen? And I actually saw this amazing YouTube video on it once, but I never really thought about it's like you're constantly investigating. I mean, when you first went into working, I think you were at KPMG, what was your first role there?
So my first job out of accounting school was at a local CPA firm in Portland, Oregon. At that time, being a foreign student, I needed
Yeah.
a sponsorship for green card. So I went to
Got it.
whoever who was willing to sponsor me. And for the first 2-3 years of my career as a professional CPA, I did tax returns during the tax season and audit of privately held companies, during the audit season. So that was a very interesting experience. I actually really enjoyed talking to those individual tax return clients about their personal stories about what has happened in their lives during that year. But after 2.5 years, of course, I had bigger dreams, and then that's when I applied for an opening at KPMG in the Bay Area. I started as the second year associate. I think that's how I got started at KPMG.
And did you do audits there? Were you mostly on the audit side?
Yeah. I ended up staying at KPMG for the next 9.5 years entirely on the audit side, and worked exclusively with technology companies of different sizes, from the very early young startup pre-revenue to the pretty late stage, well-established tech companies in the valley. And so that really opened my eyes to the different life stages, if you will, of companies and the different styles that they operate under.
What were some of the biggest changes you would see as the company would transition and grow, especially from an audit perspective?
Well, from the audit perspective, I think I was, part of the benefit being in the Silicon Valley Bay Area is really the innovation that you see from these companies. I'm of course closer with the numbers, so and then the latter part of my tenure at KPMG, there was the SaaS model was new at that time, and Salesforce was on the up and rising at that time, and companies like Adobe, who's been established for some time, was going through transition.
Absolutely.
From the perpetual software license model to a SaaS model. So at that time, it was so new that the investors needed a lot of education. And so just having gone through that, having seen that process playing out at, a variety of my clients, it was fascinating for me to be part of.
Yeah. It was very interesting. In my career, I started off in a subscription-based service. So a lot of the acronyms and a lot of the KPIs that we're looking at today, from CAC, we would have called it SAC at the time, but it's subscription-based. But so many of them are all very similar. We were looking at LTVs. We were looking at all of this stuff back from then, that every SaaS company continues to look at and obsess about today as well. And, it comes from an ISP model, which I guess, before you could have SaaS, you needed to have all the internet infrastructure that, of course, would be formulating and building the SaaS. But it is an evolution, and it was quite a different change for so many different companies out there in general. So were most of the companies that you were your clients on that end, they were all SaaS companies, or were some of them perpetual models still?
When I first started at KPMG, I think everyone was on perpetual. And then, as years go by, some of them shifted towards SaaS, or the newer companies, they were just born in the cloud. So pure SaaS, and other companies run some type of combination in the middle. So you can see a variety of different type of revenue models.
Yeah. One question I do have for you is because I've seen more and more chief accounting officer, but it hasn't always been as predominant in many places. I mean, it's coming, maybe in larger companies, but can you tell me a little bit more about, the rise of the chief accounting officer?
Yeah, interesting question. I have the same observation. So let me just share my 2 cents. I think, the requirement for the CFOs these days, it's so high. Maybe in the old days, the CFOs are more of just the guardianship, of the company to make sure operations or compliance side of the house is, under control. And then maybe there is the regular annual planning process, the core, accounting and maybe FP&A. But if I look at the role of the CFO today, it has changed pretty significantly to be really a business leader, to not only look back, but also to look forward and to help drive the right conversation with data, supporting the different perspectives so that, holistically as a leadership team, the company, it can make the right decisions with eyes open. And so there's the demand, of the CFO's time being more on the strategic leadership and that insight and that foresight perspective. And so that role became just bigger, that much bigger. That, I think, gave rise to the role of chief accounting officer, because someone is still required to, really keep the compliance side of the house under control and be an executive to that side of the house. Especially during the high growth phase of a company, to not only, look at what has happened, but also to see what's around the corner so that we don't run out of the runway. That's what I find myself spending a lot of the time. There's the day-to-day, there's always something that's wrong, always something that's on fire, but I force myself to take a step back and reflect on what's happening, what has happened, and use that to try to project out in the next 12 to 18 months time period. Try to see what's around the corner, what could derail us in the high speed that we're running, so we can continue to build that runway ahead of us.
And so do you partner with the CFO? How does that relationship work?
Yeah, I partner with the CFO, very closely. On the one side, of course, everything on the operational side of the house, including AP and payroll, and just all of those, keeping the lights on, I would call those functions, needs to run very smoothly.
Yeah,
that's not an easy job if the company is growing at, very high speed.
Yeah.
And then I would say the second component that I work with the CFO very closely is supporting strategic projects of the company. The company itself is changing rapidly. There's the rapid expansion internationally, for example, and there's the transformation of business models that was the new pricing and packaging proposals, the new product launches, and also the competitive landscape. It's impacting the business model or how we go to market, and that has a lot of impact on your rev rec policy, all sorts of accounting side of implication. And to be able to be part of that process, to have real-time feedback of what would that mean in terms of our longer term P&L forecast. That's a very important aspect that I work very closely with not only the CFO but other leaders in finance, and oftentimes go-to-market leadership as well.
Right, the rest of the executive team, and having a seat at that table and hearing that firsthand and understanding and providing that impact, is a valuable component to any future planning at all. That's very important.
Right, trying to strike a balance between the two, while continue to invest in the scalability of my own team.
Yes.
You can't just keep throwing body at problems. You need to find ways to automate and to scale in a cost-effective manner. So the balancing act of all these different components, it's really the bulk of my work.
Yeah. I mean, you were at your previous company for, I think it was 7 years, if I recall. But tell me, so you started with them and you saw them go to massive scale. What is your secret to scaling?
Yeah, my prior life was Zendesk, and that was, I joined Zendesk in 2013 when they were a late stage startup. And then went through the IPO process and stayed for another 6.5 years subsequent to that. In this altogether 7.5 years, saw maybe 10 times or more revenue growth to exceed $1 billion on the top line. And internationally, we became a lot more diversified, and there were a handful of acquisitions and a lot of different, projects and initiatives in that time frame. So definitely never a dull moment.
So as you, so you said you started when they were late stage, right before IPO. What stage were they? How far before IPO were they at that point?
I joined right about a year before they went public. That was when I joined. I think the overall finance team were maybe just a dozen of people, everyone including accounting, FP&A. So there was a pretty significant ramp up in terms of capabilities and processes and systems in that 1 year, but even more so in the years after that. When I joined, I thought the IPO was
the big one.
Was the big one. Now hindsight, looking back, that was really only the beginning.
Wow. Yeah, I believe it. Yeah. I mean, I look at companies as well that I've been at, from the magnitude just increases so much so as things get bigger, because there are more ideas, more people, more initiatives, more projects. Everything just starts going at such a rapid pace that it's like it's the snowball, right? It just gets bigger and bigger.
Totally. And for me, who have stayed there for over 7 years, I got to see in a later stage, the consequences of some of my decisions. Some were right, some were wrong. But, put me back 7 years ago, but those were the right decisions. So it's such a hard balance to strike, especially in the high growth companies, of how much further do you project? Do you build something for today, or do you build something for a year from now or 6 years from now? Yeah. And that continued focus on improving, and also keeping tabs on what's not working today and what won't work when we have 10 times of size and volume. That is such a tricky balance to strike.
Very true. How did you keep your team engaged during those times?
It's hard. It is hard. That just because the company is growing fast, to keep up with the company's pace of growth is hard enough. And for those higher achievers, wanting to get promoted in that environment is incrementally harder. You have to, your growth rate has to be higher than that growth curve of the company, which is already a pretty high baseline. One. Yeah. And so I think the leadership qualities in this high growth environment requires, one is the inspirational type of leaders. I think you just have to show up the right way in front of your teams. There were so many days that were frustrating to me, and I make an effort to remind myself to show up the right way in front of the teams. Right. On one side, I have to be real, be vulnerable. Right. I'm not going to hide things that are going on. personally with myself. But on the other hand, I think there's a responsibility as a leader to inspire your team, and especially when time is tough. Just going through year ends, it's such a drawn out process for a finance function. Starting right around this time to the time when we file the 10K, which is middle of February, it's a long stretch of 3-4 months. You just,
like a marathon.
Sprints. Yeah, like a marathon. It is, you could think of this as a sprint, but at the end of the day, you're just so exhausted by the process. And it's very important as leaders during that time to just bring that energy and keep reminding people, why are we here? We all chose to be part of a high growth company because of the opportunities and the learning curve. However, going through it is difficult, but this is what we signed up for. So just like cheering the team on the side and celebrating the small wins, it's a super important aspect to keep the team engaged.
What would you, if you were thinking back in all of your companies, would you say was your proudest team win?
I think every year when people on my team get promoted, that is the proudest moment. To seeing their personal growth.
Yeah.
I think that's an annual process or half a year. It's a reminder of why I like my job.
Yeah.
And what it means to be a good leader is to really bring up your team and let them shine.
Yeah, absolutely. If you had advice to somebody who wanted to go into the field of accounting and maybe become a CAO someday, what would it be?
Wow, that's such a big question. I think if I could, depending on the stage of their career, earlier in my career, I was too afraid of being rejected, and I cared too much about how others perceived me, and that held me back from raising my hand or even asking a question in the meeting, because I was fearful of being thought of less competent.
Yeah.
Now looking back, it was completely unnecessary, and that was a barrier that I created for myself. So I would say for the younger, earlier stage career folks, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Inaction is a worse choice than being rejected.
Yeah,
just do something and take more things in your own hands and not be too fearful about how others look at you.
Yeah, I think that that's great advice. I mean, I don't know if it's a young thing or a woman thing, but it's definitely something that I think a lot of times it's hard to want to ask a question for what your fear of being perceived as. Like, will they think less of me? I'm going to be, is that a stupid question? And I often try to do the same, like, please, there are no stupid questions. I sometimes ask a stupid question, like that happens. And sometimes I have the worst ideas and sometimes I have okay ideas. And, it's all about like pulling them out and engaging with them and getting them to engage and be there. And, you can't succeed unless you take that first step. And sometimes it is asking those questions. So thank you so much. I've enjoyed our conversation, and I would love to continue this on again. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for having me.
Yes, absolutely.